Have you ever wondered what makes you, well, you? For decades, the answer always seemed to be the simple tug-of-war, right? Nature, your DNA, versus nurture, your environment. But what if there's a third player? A hidden layer of influence that's quietly recording our life experiences directly onto our genetic code? Well, today, we're pulling back the curtain on the absolutely fascinating world of epigenetics.
Okay, to really get this, let's start with a classic puzzle. Think about identical twins. I mean, they share 100% of their DNA. They're usually raised in the exact same home, so you'd think they'd be carbon copies of each other, right? And yet, one twin can develop something like asthma or even bipolar disorder, while the other is perfectly fine. How on earth is that possible?
You see, this isn't just some family curiosity. It's a real scientific paradox. If you've accounted for both nature and nurture, what else could possibly be driving these huge differences? It really points to something that goes way beyond our basic understanding of genetics. Some kind of mechanism that can take two identical starting points and send them down completely different paths.
For the longest time, twin studies were the way we tried to figure this all out. And we learned a lot. We saw that some traits, like IQ, seem to be really heavily influenced by our genes. Others, maybe our political views, seem to have more to do with our environment. But this model, as that twin paradox shows us, it's just not the full picture. It's missing the piece that connects the two.
And that missing piece, that solution to our paradox, is epigenetics. This is that powerful third influence. It's the thing that explains how our life experiences can literally reach into our cells and change how our genes behave. It's the interpreter that stands between our genetic blueprint and the world we actually live in. So, what is it exactly? Well, the prefix epi actually means on top of. So epigenetics is literally a set of instructions that sits on top of our DNA. Think of them like tiny chemical tags or sticky notes that get attached to our genes. Now, they don't rewrite the genetic code itself, that stays the same, but they act like, like volume knobs or dimmer switches, telling your genes when to power on, when to quiet down, or when to switch off completely.
Let's try a few analogies. If your DNA is the computer hardware, the physical machine, then epigenetics is the software telling that hardware what to do. Or how about this? If your genes are a massive library full of cookbooks with every recipe imaginable, epigenetics is the chef's sticky notes that say, hey, make this recipe today, and ignore that one completely. It's the flexible, responsive layer of control. Okay, so we've got these tags and switches, and that sounds great, but how does it actually work on a physical level? How does a life experience, like stress, actually translate into a gene getting turned on or off? Let's pop the hood and look at the mechanics.
So get this. Inside every single one of your cells, you have about 2 meters of DNA, and all of that has to be packed into a nucleus that's completely microscopic. To make that happen, the DNA is wrapped tightly around proteins, and this whole bundle is called chromatin. Now, for a gene to be read and used, the cell's machinery has to physically get to it. If that chromatin is packed too tightly, the gene is basically hidden. It's silenced.
So here's the play-by-play. Our DNA coils around these spool-like proteins called histones. Now, things from our environment, our diet, our stress levels, can cause these little chemical tags to be added or removed. These tags, the epigenetic marks, are signals. They tell the chromatin to either clamp down tight, which turns the gene off, or to loosen up and open, making the gene accessible and turning it on.
All right, now that we've got the how, let's get to the wow. Let's look at some really powerful, real-world examples. And these aren't just theories. Scientists have seen these epigenetic echoes of experience in some incredible animal studies, and even in the echoes of major events from our own history. One of the most famous examples of this involves a mouse with a gene called agouti. When this gene is switched on, it makes the mice yellow, obese, and really prone to diseases like diabetes. It's an absolutely stunning visual of how what a mother eats can directly change her kids.
Okay, so here's the deal. If a pregnant agouti mother eats a normal diet, her pups get that active agouti gene, and they're born yellow and unhealthy. But if that same mother is fed a diet that's rich in nutrients that provide these epigenetic tags, those tags get passed to her pups. They attach to the agouti gene and they silence it completely. The result? Her babies are born thin, brown, and healthy, even though they have the exact same agouti gene as the unhealthy ones. Mind-blowing, right?
And this influence isn't just about what you eat, it's also about behavior. There's a famous experiment with rats that shows how a mother's nurturing can epigenetically wire her pup's brain for life, especially when it comes to handling stress.
So when a mother rat is really nurturing, she licks and grooms her pups a lot, that physical attention actually triggers the removal of silencing marks on a super important stress response gene. This essentially flips the gene on, and it lets the pups' brains develop a really robust system for dealing with stress. And they grow up to be calm, confident adult rats.
But what happens on the flip side? Well, if a mother ignores her pups, those silencing marks never get removed. That key stress gene stays switched off. And because of that, their stress regulation system just doesn't develop properly. They grow up to be anxious, jumpy adults. The mother's behavior left a permanent mark.
Now, as fascinating as these animal studies are, you're probably thinking, okay, cool, but what about us humans? Well, it turns out the exact same principles apply. Our experiences, especially the ones from early in life, leave these lasting epigenetic signatures that can shape our health for decades to come. For instance, studies of people who were conceived during a terrible famine in World War II, the Dutch hunger winter, show they have different epigenetic marks on genes related to metabolism, and 60 years later, they have higher rates of obesity and heart disease. We also see that childhood trauma can change the marks on the very same stress response genes we just saw in the rats, increasing the risk for depression and PTSD. Even just exposure to toxins in the environment can rewrite our epigenetic patterns and raise our risk for diseases like cancer.
And this isn't some rare thing that only affects a few people. Look at this number. Almost 70% of people around the world will experience a traumatic event. So understanding this epigenetic link between our experiences and our long-term health, well, it's not just an academic curiosity. It's a massive public health priority.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a little bleak, maybe even deterministic, like we're just permanently scarred by our parents' diet or our early life. But here's where the story takes a turn, because this is the most exciting and hopeful part of all. Our epigenetic destiny is not set in stone. You see, unlike our DNA sequence, which is fixed, these epigenetic marks are dynamic. And most importantly, they're reversible. They're written in pencil, not in permanent ink. And that opens up an absolutely revolutionary possibility. If we can figure out what adds the marks, maybe we can also learn how to erase them. This quote just nails the new frontier in medicine. Take some cancers, for example. We know that protective, tumor-suppressing genes can get silenced by these epigenetic marks. So now, instead of just trying to kill the cancer cells, there are new drugs designed specifically to erase those silencing marks. It doesn't kill the cell, it reprograms it. It reminds the cell of its healthy original job, letting those good genes turn back on. It's a total game changer. And this really brings us to the most powerful takeaway of all. We are not just passive victims of our genetic inheritance. Our lives, our choices, our environments, they're in a constant conversation with our DNA, and epigenetics is the language of that conversation. It shows us that our experiences literally become a part of our biology. And if these marks can be changed, it empowers us to think about how things like diet, exercise, even therapy, they aren't just changing our minds or our bodies. They are actively helping us write a newer, healthier story onto our very own genes.